Hello all, good morning everyone. I'm Dina, I'm Ms. Dina Wakesha, I'm back again. And today we're going to discuss trigonometry. And the first thing that I want to do is I want to apologize about my handwriting. Well, my handwriting is quite bad, but I'll try and make it better. Now, what is trigonometry? Trigonometry mainly is the part of math that deals with triangles, is the part of math that deals with triangles. In other words, is the geometry of triangles. Now, triangles mainly, let me just redo this. Triangles mainly classify into right-angled triangles, which is mainly what we are going to discuss today, right-angled triangles. And a right-angled triangle is a triangle that has one right angle and the other two angles are acute. And then all the other triangles, okay, that do not include a right angle triangle and what we call them non-right angled triangles. Now, this will be discussed in another video. Today, we're going to mainly discuss right angled triangles. Now, let's see what are the components of a right angled triangle. Now, أي triangle في الدنيا, any triangle has 6 elements. It has 6 elements, okay? 3 sides and 3 angles. Now, since we're discussing right angle triangle, as we just said earlier, it has one right angle and the other 2 angles are acute. Now, since the longest side is the one facing the right angle, which is called the hypotenuse, and that was discussed in a previous video, Pythagoras theorem, and I guess most of you are aware of the Pythagoras theorem. Now, the longest side facing the right angle is called the hypotenuse. And again, why is it the longest side? It's the longest side because it is opposite to the greatest angle. It is opposite to the greatest angle. Now, what about the other 2 sides of the triangle? What are the names of the other 2 sides of the triangle? Okay, now the first thing that we're going to discuss in this topic over here is these sort of questions. Let's assume I have this triangle already, and I am given this angle as 30 degrees. I am given the length of the hypotenuse, and I am required to calculate the length of the other side. So this is, as you can see in this question over here, a side is required. Now, the question here is, can I use Pythagoras theorem? Definitely not. And why is that? Because to use Pythagoras theorem, you must have 2 sides, and the other side will be easily calculated. So Pythagoras theorem doesn't work over here. Now let's assume that I have this triangle, okay? And I am given 2 sides, and I am required to calculate an angle. So as you can see, I hope my handwriting is getting better. As you can see that in this triangle over here, an angle is required. But the thing is, we all know that for a very simple triangle, if this angle is given as 40 degrees, I can easily calculate the remaining angle by subtracting 90 and 40 from 180. So I'm allowed to use 180, which is the sum of the interior angles of a triangle, if I have 2 angles given. But in this case, I don't have 2 angles given. I have 2 sides given. So how do I calculate an angle if I am given 2 sides? How do I calculate a side if I am given a side and another angle? Now, to solve this dilemma, math people helped a lot. طبعا الناس بتوع الماث يعني هم رائعين. أي مشكلة في الماث بيعرفوا يحلوها على طول. Now, to solve, let me just undo. To solve these sort of questions, math people came up with what we call the trigonometric functions. Trigonometric functions, okay? Or in other words, trigonometric rules, okay? Now, we have 3 rules that we are going to discuss today. And if you open your calculators, I just opened mine, okay? You will find these 3 buttons over here, okay? With 3 words written on top of them. I mean on the buttons themselves. Sine, cosine, and tan. Okay, you'll find these 3 buttons on the calculator. Now, what are the 3 trigonometric functions that we're going to discuss today? The first is the sine function, and the second is the cosine function, and the third is the tangent function, okay? Or sine rule, cosine rule, tangent rule. These are 3 rules that math people came up with that will help us solve these 2 triangle questions, okay? And on top of these buttons, you'll find written as well, sine -1, which is called sine inverse, cosine -1, which is called cosine inverse, and then tan -1, which is called tan inverse. Now, the rules written in pink, we're going to use to calculate a side, and the rules written in black, we are going to use to calculate an angle. So the inverse form is the form that we use in calculating an angle, واللي أنا بسميها فورمة الساحل، فورمة -1. طبعا أنا بحاول طبعا هو الفيديو هيبقى كله بالإنجليزي، بس أنا بحاول إن أنا أدخل شوية مصطلحات كده عربي برتاح نفسيا. Okay, فورمة -1. Or in other words, فورمة الساحل. Format -1 is what we use to calculate an angle, and the normal form is what we use to calculate a side. Now, before we get into these three rules and to see how they look like and how do they use them, now going back to this right angle triangle over here, and as we said earlier, the longest side, and again I repeat, the longest side facing the right angle is called the hypotenuse, which is labeled by capital H. Or you can just write hype, yani whatever. You want to label it as capital H, you want to label it as hype, it's totally up to you. And again, it's the longest side because it's facing the greatest angle. Now, what about the other two sides? يعني two sides التانيين دول مثلا ما لهمش مزاج هم كمان يبقى ليهم أسامي؟ لا، ليهم أسامي. The other two sides are called the opposite, and the opposite is labeled by capital O, or if you wish to write OPP, it's up to you. And the third side is called the adjacent. And again, the adjacent can be labeled by capital A, or if you wish to write the first three letters, which is A, D, J, it's totally up to you. طيب, which is which? مين فيهم الopposite ومين فيهم adjacent? هل أنا do I label them كده randomly? ده opposite وده adjacent? No, we do not label them randomly. In order for us to label the opposite and the adjacent, we must have another triangle labeled, we must have, another angle labeled in the triangle. For example, مثلا, in the question, this angle is labeled and given, for example, as 25 degrees. Okay, for example, which side is the opposite and which side is the adjacent? The opposite is the side facing it, اللي في وشها كده. يعني كأني واقفة هنا وقاعدة ببص كده في وشي في الشباك. Okay, the side opposite to this angle is called the opposite, and the side connecting the given angle and the 90 degrees is called the adjacent. So the adjacent is the side connecting the angle and the 90 degrees, أو ببساطة السايد اللي تحتها ده كده اسمه adjacent, والسايد اللي في وشها اسمه opposite. Let me give you another example. And the objective, again, in this slide is for us to determine which side is the opposite, which side is the hypotenuse, and which side is the adjacent. Now remember, now the objective is labeling the triangle. Let's assume that this is your 90 degrees given over here, and the question says, determine the opposite, the hypotenuse, the adjacent. The hypotenuse is the easiest to label because, as we said, it's the one opposite to the 90 degrees. Okay, now where is the opposite and where is the adjacent? Again, this triangle is incomplete. I must, again, I repeat, I must be given an angle labeled in the triangle. And assume مثلا إنه this angle is y. Okay? Which side is the opposite? Which side is the adjacent? This side over here, السايد اللي في وشها, the side opposite to it is called the opposite. And the side connecting the angle and the 90 degrees is called the adjacent. The opposite and the adjacent. Okay? And this is the first part that you have to remember very well, is how to determine the opposite, the hypotenuse, and the adjacent. And of course, we're going to go through this when we're solving questions related to this part. Now that we are done with labeling the opposite, the hypotenuse, and the adjacent, let's start by the first part. Rhymes, which is calculating a side given an angle and another side. Please, please, please remember that if you're going to calculate a side given another two sides, then you use Pythagoras theorem. Now let's just try and do something, and let's play just a little game here together. And I want you all to pick out your calculators. And I want you to remember that the angles in math so far lie between 0 degrees and 360 degrees. طبعا في A levels, the advanced levels, we have angles that are more than 360. We have positive angles, we have negative angles. الموضوع بيتغير تماما في advanced level. But so far, the angles are from 0 to 360. Let's pick any angle that we want. For example, let's pick the angle of measure 60 degrees. And I want you on the calculator to press on the button sine. Now you'll notice, and I'm doing this exactly right now, you'll notice that a bracket is open. And I want you to type 60 on your calculator. And then the bracket will close. Now, when you press equal, you'll get this answer over here, which is √3/2, okay? So what am I trying to say is that accompanied by the word sine, there has to be an angle written in this triangle, okay? Now, sine 60 has this value over here, which is given on the calculator. Now, let's play the same game with the cosine. On your calculator, press cosine, type 60, and then you'll get this answer over here, which is half. Does this game apply with the tan? Now let's press on the tan button, and then press 60, and then you'll get an answer of √3. أيوة يا مس انت عايزة ايه يعني من الهري اللي انت بتهريه ده? Okay? What I want to say is that next to the sine word and the cosine and the tan, there must be an angle given. All the angles in math have a sine value stored on the calculator, a cosine value stored on the calculator, a tan value stored on the calculator. جابوا بقى الأرقام دي منين؟ عملوهم إزاي؟ ما يخصناش. Okay? So next to the sine and the cosine and the tan, there must be an angle given. Now, if you've watched my videos before, you'll always remember that whenever I want to discuss any rule, you have to ask yourself this question: how does this rule look like? الرول ده شكله عامل ازاي? Okay? And then you need to ask yourself, when am I going to use this rule? And the third question is going to be, how do I use this rule? So before we discuss any rules in math, you have to know how do they look like, when do I use them, and how do I use them? Okay? Now let's introduce the trigonometric functions. ممكن تكون أنا الفيديوهات بتاعتي طويلة شوية، بس بصراحة أنا بحب أجيب الحاجة من أصلها. ما بحبش أدخل كده يعني إيه طص كده. So what I was just saying is that maybe my videos are a bit long, but it's just because I like to discuss everything in details. We have three trigonometric functions that we're going to discuss: sine of an angle, cosine of an angle, tan of an angle. Okay, because as we just said, in the bracket, we must write an angle. Okay? The sine is a fraction. The cosine is a fraction. The tan is a fraction. Ratio, fraction, whatever. The sine, please listen carefully, is the length of the opposite divided by the length of the hypotenuse. And this can be summarized into this word, SOH. صح. يعني this is how I say it. صح. Or of course, SOH CAH TOA. I think you've heard this before, but this is how I pronounce it. صح. S is sine, S is sine, O is opposite, H is hypotenuse. The cosine is the length of the adjacent divided by the length of the hypotenuse. Length. These are lengths because they're sides. Okay? And they are this, and the cosine rule is, and the cosine function is summarized into CAH. C stands for cosine, A stands for adjacent, H stands for hypotenuse. SOH CAH, and the tan is the length of the opposite divided by the length of the adjacent, which is summarized by the word TOA or TOA. SOH CAH TOA or SOH CAH TOA. It's totally up to you how to pronounce it. T stands for tan, O stands for opposite, and A stands for adjacent. SOH CAH TOA. Okay? And these green forms, these are the forms that we are going to use to calculate a side. These green forms, they are the rules that we are going to use to calculate the side. SOH CAH TOA. I'm going to proceed to examples now, and I'm going to explain this in two methods, and it's totally up to you which method to use. Now, خليني بس كده إيه أفكركم بحاجة, because I'm going to use this. طبعا you all remember that the rule of the speed is distance over time. And of course, you're all aware of the famous triangle of the speed. Speed هنا, that, and then distance on top, time below. So from this triangle, if you want to calculate the distance, you multiply speed times time. If you want to calculate the time, you divide distance by speed. And of course, if you want to calculate the speed. So the triangle will help. يا مس طب انت عايزة ايه? How is this related to SOH CAH TOA? From here, we can conclude 3 triangles as well. عشان أنا قلت لكم أنا هشرح وأنا بحل هشرحها بطريقتين. وكل واحد يختار الطريقة اللي على مزاجه. I'm going to create 3 triangles for my rules. So it's totally up to you to use the green or the black when you solve. The sign is the opposite over the hypotenuse. So from this triangle, if I want to calculate, for instance, the hypotenuse, I divide opposite by sign. If I want to calculate the opposite, I times. I'm going to show you when we're solved. طبعا دايما الحل بيبقى سهل لي الدنيا. The cosine triangle, cosine is the opposite as the adjacent divided by the hypotenuse. From the triangle, if you want to calculate the hypotenuse, you divide adjacent by cosine. And if you want to calculate the adjacent, you times these two. And the third triangle is for the tan, which is the opposite over the adjacent. Same story applies if you want to calculate the adjacent, opposite over tan. If you want to calculate the opposite, tan times adjacent. Let's move on to examples. Now, if you have the notes, my notes, you can refer to it. Now, this is your notes. This is my notes, actually. So if you're a student of mine, you must have this, okay? If you're not, you can just refer to these triangles. I'm going to solve 4 questions in total, actually. We're going to هنشوف دلوقتي هنحل كم حاجة. So let's look at this question over here, and I'm going to solve it by the 2 approaches, by either the rule or the triangle, and it's totally up to you. Let's see, how do I solve these sort of questions? هنا بيقول لي find the value of y, giving your answer in 3 significant figures. Now, as you can see, this is a right angle triangle. What is the first step? طبعا أنا وأنا بشرح زي ما بقول لكم الدنيا بتبقى طويلة شوية، لكن وانتوا بتحلوا مع البراكتس بيبقى الوضع أقصر. Step number 1, label the triangle. What do I mean by label the triangle? Label the sides, opposite, hypotenuse, and adjacent. Opposite, hypotenuse, and adjacent. Now, as we said, the longest side facing the right angle, this is your hypotenuse. And then where are the opposite and the adjacent? Again, وبأكد, to determine which side is the opposite and which side is the adjacent, we must have another angle labeled in the triangle, as you can see. Hey, this is the angle labeled in the triangle. The side facing it is the opposite. And the side connecting the angle and the right angle is the adjacent. This is labeled by capital O. This is labeled by capital A. It's totally up to you. Okay, يبقى تاني السايد اللي في وشها هو الopposite. اللي موصل ما بينها وال 90 degrees, this is the adjacent. So step number 1, label the triangle. Step number 2, okay, check what side is required and what side is given. أنا as an examiner, me as an examiner, which side am I required to calculate? The examiner requires the hypotenuse, okay, which is labeled هنا by small y, okay? What side is given? Given يعني given as a number, أهو ده, which is the adjacent. So the sides that the required side and the given side, the required is the hypotenuse and the given is the adjacent. يبقى مين ملوش لازمة؟ الopposite. So I don't need the opposite في حاجة. Opposite خلاص بقى can be ignored. We do not need it. And now we have the 3 rules, which are SOH, CAH, and TOA. So CAH TOA, these are the 3 rules that we have. Now it's time for us to decide which rule to use. So you need to look at the given and the required, and you need to check which function has both letters. Which function has both letters? the كح. The sine has the O and the H. The cosine has the A and the H. Okay, so we are going to use the cosine. يبقى step number 1, okay, label the required side and the given side. We label them as you can see. Second, from the 3 functions, check which function has the 2 letters. The function that has the 2 letters is the cosine. Now بقى, we have 2 approaches. You either write the rule and substitute. You just translate every letter to its word. C يعني cosine. Now, as we said, next to the cosine and the tan and the sine, there has to be an angle. Cosine equals a fraction. The order of the letters is the same order in which you put in the fraction. So the A goes on top and the H goes below. So the cosine is equal to A over H. So step number 4, after you have decided which rule to use, you just write it as it is. Now, mix and match. What do I mean mix and match? Remove letters and put numbers. So I will remove the X, put the angle, and I am given the adjacent, and I will replace it, and I am required to calculate the hypotenuse. So I just substitute. The cosine will be kept as a cosine, remove the X and put the given angle in the triangle, which is 29 degrees, equals the adjacent is given as 7.4, so I replace it, and the hypotenuse is the AY. Okay, and now by cross multiplication, and I'm sure you all know how to cross multiply, by cross multiplication, I am required to calculate the Y. طبعا this is could be written as over 1. How do I calculate the Y? These two multiply together, so Y is equal 7.4 times 1 divided by cosine 29. And then you continue by cross multiplication. How do I find the Y? الاثنين الرقمين اللي قصاد بعض times بعض divided الثالث. Now I pick my calculator and I put this fraction on the calculator. طبعا you can ignore times 1 if you wish. ملهاش لازمة. You can ignore it. And then on the calculator, أهو 7.4 over cosine 29. On the calculator, Y is equal to 8.46082, whatever. Now the question says round to 3 significant figures. So this is the 3rd significant figure. And your final answer is 8.46. طب يا مس كل دي الsteps أنا لازم أكتبها؟ لا. I am going to highlight in pink the steps that you must write in the exam. Okay, ادي 1, 2, and 3. These are the steps that you must write in the exam. خدوا بالكم أنا وأنا بشرح بطول شوية وأنا بشرح عشان بجيب الحاجة من الأول. بس لما نيجي نحل هنلاقي إن الدنيا أقصر من كده بكتير. Okay, so this is if you want to use the rule. You write the rule, you substitute, and then you cross multiply. طبعا بس نسيت أقول لكم الحكاية دي. Please, you must make sure that your calculator has the small letter D written on top. Degree. لازم يبقى الديجري موجود. Okay, now if your calculator is set on G or on R, you have to change it. And how do I change it? Press Shift, Mode, and then choose degree. Shift, Mode, and then select degree, اللي هي number 3. It has to be written, it has to be set on degree. Okay? طيب, هنقولها تاني كده سريعاً. وهنعملها بقى بالtriangle method. Okay? If you wish to use the triangle. طيب, let's see. أنا أهو السؤال عندي وزي يا جماعة بس ما قلنا and again I'm just going to insist on this إنه SOH CAH TOA can only be used in right angle triangles. You cannot use it in any other triangle. And the 90 degrees, this 90 degree has only one purpose, actually has 2 purposes. The first purpose, it says, is that it says you are allowed to use SOH CAH TOA, and the second, it just determines the hypotenuse بس. يبقى 90 degrees ملهاش غير لازمتين، هما لازمتين بس. هي بتقول لي ادي بتقول لي ادي الهايبوتنس اهو، وبتقول لي انت من حقك تستعملي SOH CAH TOA بس ملهاش لازمه تاني. So let's say if I'm in an exam and I want to solve this using the triangle method, what do I do? We don't need بقى to label the whole triangle. We just label the required and the given. Label the required and the given. So this is the given, this is the required, which is the hypotenuse. And as we said, the side connecting the angle and the 90 degrees, this is the adjacent. And then SOH CAH TOA, قلنا خلاص which to use. We are going to use the CAH. Why? Because it has both letters. Type. If I wish to use the triangle method, what will I do? I will draw my triangle. السي هنا فوق ال A وتحت ال H. السي the cosine is below, and then A over H, as you can see. Type. What am I required to calculate? I am required to calculate the H, the hypotenuse. So how do I calculate the hypotenuse? I calculate the hypotenuse by adjacent over cosine. Adjacent over cosine. بس that's it. طبعا أنا من وجهة نظري شايفة دي أقصر وأسهل. بس في ناس بترتاح إن هي تكتب الرول وتعمل cross multiplication، وفي ناس بترتاح في التراينجل. It's totally up to you. And then now what do? I just substitute. I know you have to do the substitution. 7.4 over cosine. Cosine what? This angle over here. We never use the 90 degrees يا جماعة. تاني بأكد, we never use the 90 degrees. And then on the calculator, you get بقى the same answer. Let's take another example. And برضو I'm going to solve it with both methods. And then it's totally up to you which method to use. ايه اللي حصل هنا؟ ثواني يا جدعان. Something is wrong. Okay. Okay, let's see. ايه اللي حصل بس؟ Sorry guys, there was a slight technical problem and I fixed it already. I'm not sure if I told you what was the page number. As we said, if you're going to use my notes, then you need to open to page number 236. That was the first example. And the second example is going to be in the notes, page number 237. Okay, so again, let's see what is required over here. Here it says find the length of MN, giving your answer to 3 significant figures. Okay, we're going to use this question. We're going to solve this question using the 2 approaches, and it's totally up to you which approach to use. Now, as we said, خلاص بقى مش هنقعد نعمل ال 3 sides. Always remember to label the required side and the given side. The required side and the given side. Okay. Now here it says calculate the length of MN. I'm going to highlight the required side. Now, MN is the adjacent. Why? Because as you can see, this is the angle given in the triangle. Is side connecting the angle in the 90 degrees. This is the adjacent. أو السايد اللي تحتها هو ده adjacent. Okay. Now this is the required side, which is the adjacent. And then let's see which side is given. Okay. Let me use another highlighter color. This is the given side. And again, what do I mean by given side? Given as a number. Okay, that is the opposite. This side is the opposite. Okay, لأنه أهو في وش الانجل أهو. الhypotenuse is the one facing the right angle, and I don't need the hypotenuse في حاجة. So the 2 letters that I'm going to use in this question are the A and the O. I don't need the H في حاجة. And then what do? You write the 3 rules in front of you. SOH CAH TOA, and then you look for the function that has both letters, the O and the A. Which function has both letters? The TOA. يبقى خلاص, I know now that I'm going to use the TOA. Now we have the two approaches. You either write the rule and you cross multiply, or you use the triangle method. التراينجل العجيبة دي معلش my spelling بس فكس. Or you use the triangle method. Totally up to you. Totally up to you. Okay, so let's write the rule. TOA. Okay. Now translate the rule letter by letter. T stands for tan, and as we said, next to the tan you must have an angle written next to it. The tan is the fraction. The same order of the letters is the same order of the fraction. The O goes on top and the A goes below. And then what do? I substitute, mix and match, meaning remove letters and put numbers. Remove the X and put this given angle over here, which is the 73. وزي ما اتفقنا, we do not use the 90 degrees at all. And then we have the 8.2, which is the opposite, goes here below. And then the adjacent is the required. You want to label it as adjacent, you want to label it as question mark, you want to write MN, it's totally up to you. And then by cross multiplication, you want to calculate MN. So these two multiply together. So MN is 8.2 times 1 over tan 73. Try as much as you can to use the calculator only once. Now I place this fraction on the calculator and I will get my answer after rounding, which is, it's 2.50699. مهم round to 3 significant figures is going to be 2.51. 2.51. خليني بس اتاكد بس ان انا ايه عامله كل حاجه صح، ما اكونش بس تايهه، لان انا حاليا في اجازه في ابو ظبي، فايه سايبه الماث بقالي شويه، مش قوي يعني، لسه مخلصين. Okay, so the adjacent أيوة تمام. This is the adjacent, the one next and the opposite, so we use the tan. Now let's assume I want to use the triangle method. أهو. Okay, you write the tan below, and then the O goes on top, and then the adjacent goes below. تمام. And you want to calculate the adjacent, so how do I do that? Opposite over tan. على طول بقى. Opposite over tan. دي مش zero, the opposite. Over the tan. You substitute immediately, so the opposite, which is 8.2, over the tan. On the next to the tan, you insert this angle over here, which is 73. On the calculator, you get whatever answer. On the calculator, you get whatever answer. Now, that was the first part of the day, which is how to use the trig functions to calculate a side. Now, how to use the trig functions to calculate an angle? Actually, it's much easier, much easier. Now, as we said, on your calculator, as we said earlier in this video, okay, on your calculator, you have these 3 buttons, sine, cosine, and tan. And on top of them, you have the sine inverse, or sine -1, cosine -1, tan -1. This is what we call the inverse form. The inverse form is the form that we use to calculate angles. To calculate angles. طيب, what changes are we going to do to our rules? Very, very small change. Okay? So the rules are sine O على H, cosine A على H, and then you have the tan of the angle, which is O over A. Now, if you wish to put brackets, you need to put brackets around the angles. Now, the idea here is I don't want to calculate the sine of the angle. I want the angle itself. I want the angle itself. I want to angle itself. So the thing is, all I'm going to do is that I'm going to remove the sine from this side over here and place it before the fraction as sine inverse. I'm going to shift the sign as sine inverse. So x is sine inverse O over H. I'm going to show you how to solve with it. It's super easy. هنا نفس الكلام. I don't want to calculate the cosine of the angle. Please يا جماعة differentiate between the angle and the cosine of the angle. أنا عايزة الانجل شخصيا. So what am I going to do with the word cosine? I'm going to shift the cosine before the fraction. And I'm going to write over here cosine inverse. So x is cosine inverse. نفس الكلام for the tan. Shift the tan as tan inverse. بالشكل ده. Miss, احنا we're a bit confused. ماشي. Let's take an example. أهو. You have this triangle over here. And let's assume you are given this side as 15, given this side as 12, and you're going to calculate this angle over here. Okay? Now, how do we solve such a question? Here, the given are 2 sides. So you need to label the given sides. Now, this side, the 15, is the hypotenuse because it is opposite to the right angle. And this is the required angle over here. لأنه تاني بأكد, you cannot label the opposite and the adjacent unless there's an angle given. This side over here is the adjacent. So label the given sides only. The given sides are the hypotenuse and the adjacent. The hypotenuse and the adjacent. And then we have our 3 rules. SOH, CAH, and TOA. Same approach. Look for the rule that has both letters. أهو. This is the rule that has both letters. Now you need to ask yourself 2 questions. Am I going to use the normal form ولا the -1 form اللي أنا سميتها فورمة الساحل. Okay, format -1. Whenever you are going to calculate an angle in trigonometry, you use the -1 form, the inverse function form, format الساحل form, whatever you want to use it. So we are going to use the CAH, but in the inverse form. How? C stands for cosine, but it has to be cosine inverse. When you press this on the calculator, now I want you to try and do this with me. On your calculators, press shift and then cosine, shift cosine. This automatically appears. Now, what do I insert in this bracket? You insert the fraction with the same order of the letters. The adjacent goes on top and the hypotenuse goes below. That's it. And then on the calculator, see, it's much easier. Over 15, close your bracket, and you'll get your answer after rounding, which is 36.9. Okay, let's take one more example. Let's assume this is your triangle over here. Okay, and then you have, let's assume this is the required angle. Okay, this side is given as 25, مثلا, and this side is 10. Oh. And you are required to calculate, again, an angle. You are required to calculate an angle. So step number 1, label the given sides. The given sides. This side over here is the opposite because it's the one facing the angle. And this side over here is the hypotenuse because it's facing the 90 degrees. Okay, so I have these two sides, the opposite and the hypotenuse. Step number 2, you must have these 3 functions. عايزه اقول ايه يعني مزروعه بقى جوه دماغكم بقى كده يعني لازم تبقى خلاص memorize in your head. You know, you shouldn't forget them because you're going to use them actually if you're going to proceed with your A levels. You're going to use SOH CAH TOA يعني in the AS, A2, further math, everywhere. Okay, so these are the 2 letters that we have, O and H, so I'm going to use the SOH. Now you need to ask yourself a third question. Will I use the normal form or will I use the inverse form? Since you are going to calculate an angle, so you use the inverse form. So automatically you write sine inverse. On the calculator, how do I get sine inverse? You press shift and then sine. Oh, shift sine. This automatically will appear. Okay? Now, and then what do I do? The same order of the letters, no change at all. The opposite goes below, on top, and then the hypotenuse goes below بالشكل ده. Sine inverse, shift sine اهو, 10 over 25, close your bracket. On the calculator, you'll get an answer of 23.6, of course, after rounding to 1 decimal place. Okay, let's go back to the notes. Okay, now we have 2 more questions only to be solved, question number 3 and question number 4, and that's it. Again, if you're using my notes, لا please والنبي ما كنش بس ايه عكيت تاني وبوظت عملت برضو I don't know why does it do this. Okay. ماشي. Okay, I'll have to pause a bit برضو to fix the same technical problem. Just give me 2 seconds. Okay, I'm back. Sorry. So let's proceed. As we said, this is page number 237 in your notes. Okay, let's solve one more question related to this part over here, which is calculating an angle. And then I'm going to move to question number 4, which is going to be the last question of this video. And I really hope that even if my videos are a bit long, you know, they are helpful for you. Okay, so let's see here. The question says, find the value of X and give your answer to 1 decimal place. So step number 1, as we said, label the 2 given sides, as you can see. Now, this side is the one facing the right angle, so it's labeled as the hypotenuse. And this side over here, this is the given angle. The side اللي تحتها, or the side connecting the angle and the 90 degrees, this is the adjacent. Okay, so this is a CAH rule. Okay, SOH CAH TOA. Now, as we said, these are the 2 letters that we have. So I use the CAH. I know بقى that I use the CAH. خلاص. Okay, and then what do I do next? Now, since we're focusing now on the inverse form. I know that I'm going to use the inverse form because I'm going to calculate an angle in this question over here. Translate immediately into cosine inverse. If you press on the calculator shift cosine, as we said several times, a bracket will open. What do I insert inside the bracket? You insert a fraction with the same order of the letters. The A goes on top as the numerator, and then the H is your denominator. On the calculator, shift cosine, 7.3 over 8.6, and then you close it. After rounding to one decimal place, you will get an answer of 31.9. So we did several questions related to SOH CAH TOA, whether you're going to use them to calculate a side or you're going to use them to calculate an angle. Now let's see what happens now. Now this question over here for me is super important, and this is the last question that we're going to do today. And this is the question. This is a question about double trigonometry, and we discussed double trigonometry in Pythagoras before. Now, what is a double trigonometry question? And actually, sometimes it might be a triple trigonometry question. Double trigonometry question is a question in which you use more than one rule, or as you can see, it has two triangles. Okay. Now the idea, where are my triangles? Let me highlight them. This is the first triangle, the one labeled in yellow, and let me use another highlighter. This is the one highlighted in green. Okay, now we have two triangles over here, as you can see. Now the trick in these questions is, which triangle are you going to start with? Always remember to start with the triangle that has 3 items given. 3 items, but mainly a combination of angles and sides. Okay, 3 items given. So as you can see, the yellow triangle has a side given and has this angle given and then has the 90 degrees given. So it has 3 items. If you have 3 items given, then you can easily calculate the remaining 3. But the question is, do I need the remaining 3? No. Now I'm going to take this triangle outside. Now, if you wish to separate the triangle as I do over here, it's up to you. Or if you wish to work on the diagram itself, it's totally up to you. Okay. And here goes your 90 degrees. Now, خلاص, يبقى أنا, the first thing that I need to do, bear in mind is that I'm going to start with the triangle that has 3 items, as you can see. Now, the trick is, which item do I calculate? Do I calculate this angle over here? Do I actually need it? Do I calculate this side? Do I need it? Or what do you think we're going to calculate? Tamam, bravo. We're going to calculate this side over here, the one that has 2 colors. So the trick in these questions is to calculate the common item. So after I start with the triangle that has 3 items, I calculate the common item. لأنه يا جماعة إحنا, our main concern in O level is the time management, as the curriculum is so long and the exam is long as well. So we need to work on the time management. So I don't need to calculate any side or any angle that I don't need. So خلاص, we agree that we're going to calculate this side over here. Since we are discussing right angle trigonometry, so I am allowed to use Pythagoras, SOH, CAH, and TOA. طبعا Pythagoras doesn't apply in this topic over here, لأنه we don't have 2 sides given. So let's see. How do I start with this triangle over here? Label the given, which is the hypotenuse, facing the right angle. Label the common item, which is the adjacent in this case, because it's the side connecting the angle and the 90 degrees. أنا شايفة أن الكوزين مسيطرة في الفيديو ده. Okay, so the given is the hypotenuse and the required is the adjacent. So I'm going to use the CAH. Now remember, I will use the CAH in the normal form, ولا I will use it in the inverse form. In this part over here, I will use it in the normal form because I'm going to calculate a side. صراحة, I'm going to use the triangle as it's, for me, it's shorter. The cosine goes below, here goes the adjacent, and here goes the hypotenuse. What am I required to calculate? I am required to calculate the adjacent. So how? طب يا miss, what do we label it? Label question mark, مش فارقة. So the adjacent is the hypotenuse multiplied by the cosine. Now let's remove and put numbers. The hypotenuse is 9.1 multiplied by cosine. Now, as we said, next to the cosine, there has to be an angle, which is this one. وزي ما قلت قبل كده in this video, 90 degrees ملهاش لازمة نهائي. And now on the calculator, 9.1 times cosine 57. And then I will get this answer over here, 4.95621, whatever. طبعا, I did discuss before the use of this button over here, which is the ANS button or the answer button, which is next to your equal sign on your calculator. ميزة الانسر button ده, this answer button works exactly as copy paste. Works exactly as copy paste. So when I use the answer button, as if I am using this long answer. If you want to round it and use the rounded figure, مفيش مشكلة برضه. So خلاص, now we worked on the first triangle and we calculated the common item. Now let's move on to the second triangle, which is this, the one highlighted in green. أهو. I'm going to draw it بالشكل ده. تمام. Here goes your 90 degrees. And let's see what is given here. We have the 3.4 and then we have the x هنا. السؤال ده حلو ليه؟ لأن هو بيراجع على الفورمة العادية وفورمة -1. And then remember that we just calculated this side over here, which is 4.96 if I decide to round it. 4.96 if I decide to round it. Now let's work back on this triangle over here. In this triangle, I am going to calculate an angle. So since I'm going to calculate an angle, so I will use the inverse form. I will use the inverse form. So when we use the inverse form, let's remember together that we labeled the given sides. Now, the 4.96 now is an hypotenuse. عشان كده بقول لكم يا جماعة الsides بتوعت الtriangle, they're labeled according to the given angles. هم مش ثابتين. ده hypotenuse في التراينجل الأولاني فلازم يبقى hypotenuse في التراينجل التاني. مش شرط. It depends on the triangle and the angle. Sorry, the side and the angle. So the 4.96 is an adjacent in the yellow triangle and a hypotenuse in the green. And then we have this triangle over here, this side and aspa, which is the opposite. So in the second triangle, in the green triangle, what are the sides that we have? Now let me just rewrite this over here. This is 4.96. Actually أنا هعمل لكم حاجة لذيذة قوي. I use this magic trick a lot. مش magic ولا حاجة يعني, بس إيه؟ أهو. كأن ده مش موجود خلاص. Okay? You work on every triangle separately, as if the other one doesn't exist. So see, maybe now it looks easier. خلينا بقى نحط السايد اللي احنا لسه حاسبينه ده دلوقتي اللي هو 4.96. So, and now let's label this triangle. Now, the 3.4 is the opposite. And the 4.96 now is a hypotenuse. تمام كده؟ يبقى أنا in the second triangle, I'm going to use the صح. لأنه it has both letters, the O and the H. But the question is, will I use it in the normal form or in the inverse form? And already I decided that then I will use it in the inverse form because I'm calculating an angle. So S stands for sine, but now sine inverse, which is shift sign. Okay. Now on your calculator, press shift sign. This automatically will appear. The fraction is the same order of the letter, the opposite, which is 3.4. And the hypotenuse is this number over here, which is 4.96. This is what you write on the exam, but in the exam. But I will press on the answer button. Why will I press on the answer button? So I use this whole figure, okay? So now, خليني بس أعملها من الأول to make sure that I have the number on my calculator. Cosine 57. Okay, so 4 point kaza, kaza, kaza. Now, when you press, again, sine inverse, now on the calculator, shift sign, I will write on top 3.4, and then I will not write 4.96, I will press on the answer button. So now the calculator took this number without rounding. And then I press equal, and I will get my answer, which is 43.3. Okay, and the question here says round to 1 decimal place, so this is the rounded figure. Okay. This is almost everything that you need to know about trigonometry, صح كح توا. I hope this video was useful to you. If you wish to practice more in my resources, you can solve in classifieds part 1 and part 3. And of course, the marking scheme is available for my students. And I hope this video was useful to you. Thank you all, and see you in the next video. Bye.